New York never sleeps, but for some, the city is a nightmare that refuses to wake up. It was just after 11 o'clock when Emily heard the first ring of the doorbell. A short, dry sound that clashed with the vibe of the street below. From her 14th floor apartment, she could hear the distant rumble of cars, the blare of sirens, the occasional bark of a puppy trapped in some tiny apartment. But that ring had something personal, almost intimate. She wasn't expecting anyone. The food order she'd placed earlier had already arrived hours earlier. Still, the doorbell rang again, this time longer, more insistent. Emily froze in the middle of the room, her gaze fixed on the door. A shiver ran down her spine, but she tried to rationalize. It must be a mistake. Someone on the wrong floor. She approached slowly, barefoot, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The emptiness, however, was unsettling. The emergency lights bathed the carpet in a reddish hue, creating shadows that stretched until they disappeared into the walls. Nothing. No one. Emily was about to walk away when she heard something. Light footsteps, very close, but out of the peephole's field of vision. "Is anyone there?" he asked, his voice trembling. Silence. She stepped back, closed the extra lock, and tried to laugh at herself. Maybe a crazy neighbor, maybe some lost delivery man. She turned on the TV to distract herself, but as the sound filled the apartment, something in her remained alert, as if she were being watched. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang again. Shorter, sharper. Emily approached, this time with her cell phone in hand. She looked through the peephole. Nothing. But before she could move away, a deep, muffled male voice came from the other side. "Your delivery." The sentence was said slowly, as if each syllable was too heavy to come out. "I didn't ask for anything," Emily replied, trying to sound firm. The voice did not respond. Then came a different sound, the rustle of something being placed on the floor, followed by slow footsteps retreating. Emily waited. A minute. 2. Silence. Cautiously, she opened the door enough to peek inside. On the carpet lay a white plastic bag, unmarked. No delivery label, no note. She knelt down and before touching it, noticed something. The bottom of the bag was damp. A metallic smell escaped from the opening, faint but unmistakable. Blood. Her heart raced. She threw the bag inside and slammed the door shut, as if that could keep the terror outside from coming in. But it was too late. The apartment, once silent, felt smaller, more suffocating. She didn't have the courage to open the bag right away. She sat on the couch, staring at it from a distance. The TV was still on, but now it seemed distant, irrelevant. The only real sound was her own rapid breathing. When he finally opened it, he found something wrapped in brown paper like butcher's meat. His hands trembled as he peeled back the layer. Inside was a scrap of fabric, a t-shirt, stained with dried blood and with a name written on the collar in black ink. Sarah. Emily didn't know any Sarah. But somewhere, a man in a delivery uniform smiled in the darkness, pleased to know his new client had received her package, and that he would come back. Emily spent the night with Sarah's t-shirt folded inside a shoebox, 2 plastic bags encasing the fabric as if distance could contain the metallic smell that insisted on seeping into the corners of the apartment. The living room window framed the New York dawn like an aquarium of cold lights. Below, horns and sirens told stories that weren't hers. Yet. She considered calling the police, mentally composed the sentences, and when she picked up her phone, she realized the detail that paralyzed her. The doorbell had no camera. What she'd heard, and the empty hallway, were a perfect opening. "I have nothing but a dirty bag and a t-shirt." The sentence sounded weak even to herself, and yet fear demanded action. She opened the condo app. Days earlier, the building manager had posted a notice asking residents to authorize delivery drivers to enter via intercom, never via text message. Below, dozens of comments, reports of people receiving fake orders, others of minor card fraud. One, in particular, caught her attention. Doorbell rings with no one in the hallway. Anyone wearing delivery masks? The post was 2 months old. No official response. The building was old but not run down. Doors with reinforced locks, hallways covered in carpets that muffled footsteps, cameras that... She opened the CCTV page. The cameras on the 14th floor were under maintenance. 13 days. She took a deep breath and dialed 911. As the phone rang, the doorbell rang again. A single dry ring in the raw flesh of the early morning. The number kept ringing. She froze with the receiver to her ear, her gaze fixed on the door. The ring didn't repeat. The operator answered and asked what the emergency was. Emily's voice came out in a confused whisper. A bag, blood, an empty hallway. Someone saying, "Your delivery." The operator responded with scripted objectivity. "Don't touch anything. We'll send a patrol car." She hung up and, as if waking from a trance, realized she had already touched everything. Wait, to hold on. She paced the room like a caged animal, expecting the sound of footsteps in the hallway to announce the police. Instead, she heard a noise behind her coming from the service area door. A faint scratching. Impossible, that door opened onto the ventilation shaft. Emily leaned closer, put her ear to it. The silence on the other side was thick, complete. But in the silence there are details. The hum of an engine. The distant echo of a conversation that could have been 2 floors below, her own blood pounding in her temples. It's your head, she decided, but the scratching returned, very discreet, like a fingernail on metal. When the patrol car finally arrived 28 minutes later, Emily was already sitting with the shoebox on her lap, as if it were a gift that needed to be justified. The officers asked basic questions, looked at the bag, and frowned. One of them, younger, suggested it might be animal blood. The other, older, wiped his forehead with his sleeve and said something about pulling the images. Emily pointed to the maintenance sign. The older man sighed and wrote it down. The procedure, they said, would be to collect the material and check it. Maybe an ex-boyfriend, a bad joke, someone trying to scare. It happens. Emily shook her head, as if grateful for help that never came. When they left, their absence was worse than the wait. The apartment closed in around her like a cocoon of heavy air. In the kitchen, the fluorescent light flickered and stabilized. Emily washed her already clean hands, scrubbing until her wrists ached. In the sink mirror, she saw red eyes, pale skin, a woman who had lost sleep, and the outline of herself in just a few hours. When she returned to the living room, her phone vibrated with a delivery notification. Your order is arriving. She hadn't ordered anything. The name of the restaurant was familiar, a Thai restaurant 3 blocks away, but the account was linked to an email address that wasn't hers. The notification came from the app she used before, uninstalled months ago. How? She clicked. The order was there in the history, a single item, spicy soup. The address? Hers. It could be a mistake on the restaurant's part, a registration mix-up, or someone had hacked into her old profile. She tried calling the establishment. It went straight to voicemail. The app's map showed a motorcyclist approaching, a miniature icon moving through the maze of avenues toward the building. Her heart raced as if it were the sound of a motorcycle coming up the street. When the doorbell rang, it was a series of rhythmic, rapid rings, like impatient fingers. Emily grabbed her cell phone with her left hand, the extra lock with her right. She approached the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the emergency light this time cast a narrow shadow on the door's baseboard, as if someone were glued to the wall, just out of sight. She spoke without opening the door. Who is it? Silence. The shadow at the baseboard moved. Then a whisper came, muffled and slow. Your soup. The voice. The same voice. 3 syllables that dragged out something that wasn't fatigue but calculation. Emily felt the hair on her arms rise, a physical discomfort like nausea without vomiting. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. The shadow retreated. She heard the rustle of a package left on the doormat, the footsteps receding, not the dry sound of sneakers on a carpeted hallway, but something lighter, gliding, as if her weight were being measured with each step. Emily waited. 1 minute. 2. 3. The same choreography of fear. She opened the door a crack just enough to see the white bag, identical to the previous one, without a logo. Inside, a jar with a lid, sweaty with condensed steam, the smell of spices and something that shouldn't be there. She didn't bring it inside. Instead, she picked up the jar with a dish towel, carried it to the garbage chute, and threw it away. As the lid slammed shut, a thought occurred to her. He knows you're afraid to open it. She returned to the living room, breathing shallowly. Her phone vibrated again. Rate your delivery. She clicked on impulse. The delivery person's photo was a gray circle. No face, no name, just an ID. Jacker 7413. Below, an option to leave a tip. Another to send a message. The app seemed to mock her, normalizing the absurd. How was your experience? Emily closed the app, blocked notifications, and threw her phone on the couch as if it were burned. She decided to leave the apartment. She needed air. Voices not invented by her own panic. She put on a coat, grabbed her bag, tested the doorknob twice, and stepped out into the hallway. The lights were dimmer, or was it her head? She slammed the door shut slowly and began walking. The carpet swallowed her footsteps. At the end of the hallway, the firebox reflected a distorted oval of her face. She pressed the elevator button. Nothing. She pressed it again. The panel displayed a makeshift under maintenance, taped together. She cursed softly and headed for the stairs. The steps were cold concrete, and the echo of her footsteps ascended with her like a second person 2 feet away. On the 12th floor landing, the draft from the ventilation shaft slipped through a grate and touched her neck. She sped up. As she pushed open the door to the 10th floor, she heard the sound of wheels. A cart? Cleaning? The door creaked open, revealing a hallway just like her own, but with one difference. All the doors had security chains dangling, as if someone had tampered with each one and stopped in the middle. And in the middle of the hallway, abandoned, sat a metal cart with a cooler identical to the ones used by delivery drivers. Is anyone there? Her voice was very small. Silence for a second that lasted 5. Then, a sharp click, a door in the background being softly closed. Emily took a step back, her body urging escape, curiosity driving her forward. She approached the cart. On top was an old clipboard with laminated sheets displaying lists of names and apartment numbers, columns for received, time, signature. It was the building's actual floor plan mapped according to delivery routes. In the last column, instead of signatures, there were perfectly straight lines, as if someone were practicing the patience of the gesture. The name Sarah appeared on floor 6. The blood on the shirt was no accident. Emily's thumb brushed the edge of the paper, and she felt an uneven texture, a line of dried moisture that wasn't ink. She headed back to the stairs. She felt like someone was watching her through the peephole in every door. She almost ran down to the lobby. The doorman, Miguel, looked up from a magazine and frowned when he saw her condition. Is everything okay, Miss Emily? She tried to answer calmly and failed. Someone's using the building as a board game. The cameras on my floor are broken. Doorbells ringing. Fake packages. Do you let delivery people come in without permission? Miguel glanced at the monitor. 4 screens, 2 black, 1 drizzling. The one on the 14th displayed the word, no signal. Theory and practice are different things here. We ask for permission, of course. But a lot of people send it directly through the building's chat. If someone arrives with a bag and the resident says, okay, we let them go. Some residents have a password, others leave it open. New York, you know how it is. What happened? Emily summarized. He listened with a patience that bordered on incredulity. He said he would personally monitor the next deliveries to the 14th floor. He promised to check the 10th floor. That floor is a pain. She nodded, thanked him, and as she turned toward the elevator, which had miraculously started working again, Miguel said something that froze her spine. Oh, and If someone rings without being seen through the peephole, don't open it. Sometimes the guy leans against the wall so the ceiling camera doesn't catch it. It's an old thief's trick. The ride back was a pitfall. Alone in the elevator, Emily stared at the mirror and thought about how easy it was to dismantle her life. A doorbell ring, a package, a voice carrying the exact weight of hesitation. The door opened with a brief hiccup. The hallway of the 14th floor was deserted. Too deserted. On the neighboring doors, the security chains hung, as on the 10th, but now she was certain that, this morning, they hadn't. She walked quickly to her own door, the key trembling in the keyhole. She entered, locked it, and then noticed there was a small envelope stuck under the door on the inside. Someone had pushed it through a millimeter-wide crack. On the front, her name, in thin, careful letters, Emily. Her hands were sweating so much that the paper softened. Inside was a business card with no logo, just a QR code in the center. Below, in tiny font, "Rate your delivery person." Her heart skipped a beat. She covered the code with her thumb as if to prevent anything from getting in. Still, against her better judgment, curiosity got the better of her. She took out her phone, pointed the camera, and the screen opened to a white, minimalist page with the number 74 on screen and the question, was he quiet? The options, less than should have been, and more than necessary. Emily hung up her phone, her whole body screaming to destroy it, throw it out the window, cut the internet cables. Instead, she took a deep breath, sat on the floor, leaning against the door, and cried silently, tears streaming down her face as if someone had turned on a faucet from inside. The doorbell didn't ring. The silence, yes, persisted. Late that afternoon, she received a call from the police. The blood on the shirt, they said, looked like animal blood, but they weren't sure yet. Further analysis would be required. A bureaucratic phrase meant to calm her down, but only drove her deeper. If there was doubt, there was a possibility. When she hung up, the doorbell rang for the third time that day. She didn't come closer. She remained there, on the floor, listening. No voice. Just something being slid through the bottom crack, with the patience of someone who's learned to read another's timing. Another envelope. Emily took 4 steps toward the room as if deciding to flee from her own door, but stopped halfway. She turned back. She picked up the envelope with a kitchen spatula, as if scooping up a live animal. Inside, something else. A poorly developed Polaroid photograph of a dark hotel hallway. In the corner, a piece of doormat similar to the one in the building. A triangle of light outlined the floor. And in the center of the image, something small, almost imperceptible. The tip of a blue rubber glove peeking out from under a half-open door. Hers. Emily turned her head slowly, as if her neck weighed 100 pounds. The crack of light under the door was exactly the same as in the photo. The doormat, the same. The position, the same. Someone had stood there with her door ajar, forcing their glove underneath, photographing their own audacity. She felt the metallic taste rise in her mouth. Then a detail shattered her. In the bottom corner of the Polaroid, handwritten, "Later, cold soup has no smell." She ran to the service area and pressed her ear against the ventilation shaft door again. This time, it wasn't silence she found, but a distant, deep sound like the rumble of an exhaust fan. And behind it, something else. The echo of a short whistle, a melody reduced to 3 notes, repeated with cruel mathematics, and between repetitions the scratching of a fingernail on metal, as before, only closer. She backed away, stumbling over her own breath. She grabbed a chair, leaned against the service door handle, and erected another chair in the entrance, improvising barricades with trembling arms. Night fell, and the apartment became the only possible country. Fear began to have simple rules. Don't look through the peephole. Don't answer the phone. Watch the cracks as if they were wounds. The clock on the wall, a neutral object par excellence, became the executioner. Each minute was a sentence of waiting. As dawn approached, Emily turned off all the lights, sat on the floor between the living room and the hallway, and stared at her own door as if watching a sleeping animal. At 3:17, a slight vibration ran through the floor, as if someone heavy had passed through the hallway barefoot. The doorbell didn't ring. Her phone lit up on its own with a notification. "You forgot to rate." She turned the device face down. The continuous vibration turned into a buzzing sound. The entire apartment seemed to vibrate like the surface of a glass of water. And then the only thing that hadn't happened yet, the simplest, the most intimate, happened. The doorknob turned half a turn, slowly, until it hit the inner lock with a gentle click, almost a tap. He waited 3 seconds, and then returned to its original position. A pause. Again. Click. Pause. Click. Pause. A third time, slower, as if marking time. Then, total silence. The fullest silence ever. Emily threaded her fingers through her hair and clutched her head, as if willing her skull not to split open. She remembered the card. Was he silent? And almost laughed, a dirty, short laugh that died in her throat. On the carpet in front of the door, she noticed a small, triangular shadow. The crack at the bottom let through a strip of darkness. The thing on the other side was breathing too. She could hear it. A rustle of fabric, the faint snap of a glove, the patience of someone who's learned to exist between doorbell rings and fire escapes. Somehow, this calmed her. The enemy had a body. The enemy was tiring. The enemy needed time. She too. As day began to dawn, Emily decided she wasn't just a target anymore. She took some tape, small pieces of thin paper, and glued a nearly invisible strip along the bottom crack of the door. She placed a strand of hair across the peephole slit. She sprinkled coffee grounds on the floor, forming a fine powder in a semicircle in front of the door. A poor man's science, perhaps, for those without cameras. Then she sat and waited. And for the first time in 24 hours, she slept a short, fragmented sleep without dreams, or with dreams so close to reality that it was better to call them a pause. When she woke, the paper flags under the door trembled in the hallway's non-existent draft. The hair in the peephole was split in half. In the coffee grounds, the imprint of a careful, almost weightless sole, with hexagonal designs she recognized where she least expected. The advertising photo of a large delivery network that used to print them on the sneakers of official delivery men. It was the last piece of evidence she wanted in the morning. It was also the first map of the enemy's body. And under the door, finally, no envelope, no card, just a line written in pen, super thin on the floor itself, leaning against the wood. More than necessary. The first thing Emily noticed when she opened her eyes was silence. Not the natural silence of a sunrise, but a thick, unnatural silence that seemed to cling to the walls. New York was never silent, even 14 stories above the street. There was always the distant roar of engines, sporadic horns, a dog barking without an owner to tell it to shut up. But that day, nothing. The second detail was the smell. It wasn't the strong aroma of stale coffee that permeated the hallway whenever a neighbor opened the door, nor the faint sourness of the old carpet. It was a sweet, almost imperceptible odor, like decaying flowers. It came from close by, from inside. Emily stood slowly, her body heavy, as if every muscle resisted. She walked to the kitchen, expecting to find something forgotten in the sink, but everything was clean. The smell was coming from the living room. She followed the trail to the front door. The ribbon with the streamers was still there, motionless, untouched. The coffee grounds still traced their dark arc. But in the center of it, where before there had been only the smooth floor, now lay something. A fresh pink petal, its tip slightly burned. Emily stood still for long seconds, feeling the skin on her arms tingle. It hadn't been there the night before. Someone had passed through the door without a trace, except for a delicate, almost intimate gesture, as if it were a personal gift. With every passing minute, the apartment seemed to shrink. The light streaming through the windows grew dull, tinting the furniture yellow. The air seemed denser. Emily closed all the curtains, leaving only a crack to watch the street. But the view of the sidewalk brought no comfort. Down below, parked on the opposite corner, was a black motorcycle with a delivery box. The bench was empty. She turned away from the window. She went to the bathroom and turned on the hottest water possible, hoping the steam would wash away the sickly sweet smell. As the water hit the tile, she noticed a distinct sound, a dull crack coming from the laundry area. A single one, like wood giving way under weight. Emily turned off the shower and stood still, drops falling from her hair onto the tiled floor. The crack didn't repeat, but now there was another sound. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like held breath. The door to the laundry area was closed, but the space beneath it revealed a shadow that hadn't been there before. She took a slow step, then another, until she was close enough to hear better. It was breathing. Slow. Measured. Not the sound of someone exhausted, but of someone patient. Emily backed away silently, entered the bedroom and grabbed the sewing scissors from the drawer. She returned to the living room and, without thinking, pushed the sofa against the door to the laundry area, blocking it. The cell phone vibrated on the table. An anonymous message. "The soup is getting cold." Emily felt her throat dry. She ran to the kitchen and locked the door to the laundry area, even though she knew it meant nothing. The apartment was now a map of makeshift barricades. Chairs against doors, furniture moved, anything to delay an intruder who might already be inside. Afternoon arrived without her noticing. The silence continued, but now there were small interruptions. A brief tap on the wall behind the bed, like a fingernail scratching plaster. A soft creak from the ceiling, like measured footsteps. And every hour, a low metallic sound from the front door, as if someone were running the tip of an object along the metal of the lock. Early in the evening, Emily decided she needed to keep the lights off. She sat on the floor leaning against the living room wall, her cell phone in hand and the scissors in her lap. The minutes dragged by until, shortly after midnight, the doorbell rang. Just once. Long. Steady. She didn't move. She stood there, feeling the touch vibrate through the air. Then slowly a new sound began, something being dragged outside, scraping the carpet. The noise carried to the end of the hallway. And back, slower, closer, until it stopped right in front of the door. Silence, then 3 sharp knocks, not with a hand, but with something hard, heavy. And between each knock, a perfect, calculated pause. Emily closed her eyes. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to know. But she knew that when she opened them, the apartment would never be the same. Emily didn't know how long she stood there, leaning against the wall, listening to the nothingness that followed the 3 knocks. The silence had a new, almost physical weight, as if it were being pressed against her body. Then, without warning, a sharp sound cut through the air, a dry snap, like plastic being crumpled, coming from inside the door. It wasn't an isolated sound. It repeated itself, quieter, closer, until Emily realized it was coming from below, where the wood met the floor. She bent down slowly, her heart pounding, and saw something that made her stomach turn. A piece of clear plastic wrap, as thin as cellophane, being slowly pulled in through the bottom slot. There was no way anyone could do this outside without lying on the ground and slipping their arm underneath. The movement was calm, methodical, almost delicate. Emily stepped back, but didn't stop watching. The plastic was pulled away completely, disappearing on the other side like a tongue retracting a piece of meat. The apartment, which already felt small, began to shrink even further. The air felt heavier, as if each breath required a conscious effort. Emily stared at the walls and swore that for a moment they seemed closer, as if they were leaning inward. She blinked hard, trying to dispel the sensation. The next few hours dragged by in a cycle of micro sounds. A click from the kitchen light switch, even though the light remained off. A soft drip in the bathroom, even with the faucet turned off. And, every now and then, a faint scratching behind the walls, as if something or someone was crawling inside. Around 3:40 in the morning, Emily began to hear something else. It wasn't scratching or knocking anymore. It was breathing. But it wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was everywhere. It was as if the walls, the ceiling, the floor itself were breathing with her in a slow, deep rhythm. They inhaled when she inhaled, exhaled when she exhaled. She tried to convince herself it was just her mind playing tricks. But as she closed her eyes for a moment, she felt a warm draft brush against the back of her neck. Not from the window, not from the door, but from the carpet, as if something beneath her had exhaled. Emily stood up suddenly, stumbling over one of the chairs used as a barricade. The wood hit the floor with a crash, and the sound echoed strangely, as if it were coming from within the walls as well. Then a light tap on the door. Just one, quick tap, almost as if someone had tapped with the tip of a finger just to say, "I'm here." She didn't answer. The cell phone, forgotten on the couch, turned on by itself. On the screen, a new message. "You're going to open it before the walls open for you." Emily felt her entire body shudder. Her phone slipped from her hand and fell to the carpet. Instantly, the breathing in the walls seemed to change, no longer keeping pace with hers, but quickening, as if the apartment had become excited by fear. Leaning against the corner of the room, she closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing, as if she could fool the place she was trapped in. But with each attempt, the walls seemed to close in a little, and somewhere very close, a barely audible sound began, the steady beating of a heart. It wasn't hers. The heart Emily heard wasn't in her chest. It wasn't in any body she could see. It throbbed in the floor, the walls, the ceiling. A muffled, damp sound, as if coming from within the structure. Each beat seemed to push against the air, like an invisible wave moving the strands of her hair. He tried to rationalize. Old pipes, the vibration of some engine, his imagination frayed by fear. But then as he leaned against the living room wall, he felt something impossible. It was warm as skin, and soft. She jumped back. She stared at the white surface, waiting to see it move. It didn't. Still, she knew it was different. The entire apartment was different. It wasn't just space anymore, it was a body. The sweet, cloying smell returned, stronger, like rotting meat. Emily covered her nose with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, but the odor seemed to come from the air itself, seeping into her nostrils, down her throat, and clinging to her lungs. The phone rang. Not the cell phone. The landline, which never rang. Emily stared at it as if it were a strange creature. The sound wasn't loud, but each ring vibrated the wood of the cabinet where the phone sat. She answered with a trembling hand. On the other end, silence. Then a distant noise. A spoon stirring something liquid, the clink against a ceramic plate. Then the same deep, drawling voice she'd heard that first day. "It's getting cold." Emily hung up. She ran to the door and pulled the locks. Something inside her wanted to open it, get it over with, face whatever was there. But her survival instincts caught her fingers in the metal. She bent down to look through the crack at the bottom. Dark, but there was a low, damp sound, like fabric being slowly crumpled. She went to her bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out an old suitcase. She decided she'd be out of there as soon as the sun came up. She hurriedly gathered clothes, documents, and her cell phone charger. But when she zipped it up and turned around, the bag was wet. Moisture spread across the fabric like sweat. She touched it with her fingers and realized it wasn't water. The metallic smell instantly rose. Blood. She dropped her bag and stumbled backward. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling seemed lower. The air felt warmer. Then she realized the house was breathing faster. It was excited. The sound of her heart grew louder, each beat heavier than the last, until Emily was certain she was no longer alone. Not in the normal sense, but in the sense that the entire house was watching her, listening to every movement, savoring every second. The phone vibrated in her pocket. A photo. It was the old Polaroid, but now fully developed. It showed the door to her apartment seen from outside, with a shadow silhouetted against the carpet. The shadow of a man crouched down, his head tilted, as if listening intently, and in the handwritten caption just 2 words. "Open. Now." Emily dropped her phone on the floor. As she bent down to pick it up, she felt something lightly press against the sole of her foot, a gentle but unmistakable pressure. It was as if the carpet had swelled, as if there were something underneath, breathing, moving. As he stepped back, he saw the coffee grounds he had scattered in front of the door move on their own, forming a small whirlpool. And then, from outside, came the most disturbing sound of all. Not knocking, not breathing, but a prolonged whisper, repeated over and over, until the words formed clearly. "You're already inside the mouth." Emily stood still. She knew that in that moment there was no door to go through, no window to open, no hallway to escape. The apartment was no longer a place. It was an organism, and she was being swallowed. Emily stood, trying to shake off the absurd notion that the apartment was a mouth, but every second reinforced that feeling. The sweet smell grew stronger. The air seemed to pulse in warm waves, and the walls seemed to breathe in time with her, accelerating as her panic grew. She decided to leave. She couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed the key, unlocked the locks, and pulled the door open. The hallway was there, lit, silent, empty. No shadows, no delivery man. She hurried out, closing the door behind her, and started walking toward the elevator. But after a few steps, something was wrong. The hallway seemed longer. The light from the lamps wasn't as white as before. It had a yellowish tint, almost like an old infirmary. She passed the numbered doors, 1408, 1407, 1406. But when she reached 1401, turning into the elevator lobby, she found another door numbered 1408. She stopped, blinked, looked back. The hallway seemed narrower. She took a deep breath, turned, and walked in the opposite direction. More doors, more numbers, until hers again. 1409. He tried to open it. The key fit. The door gave way. But when he stepped inside, he wasn't in his own apartment. Or was he? Everything was the same, the sofa, the curtains, the kitchen. But something was different. The air was warmer, the walls darker, and in the center of the room, on the table, sat a single bowl of steaming soup. Emily backed away, her heart pounding in her throat. She ran back out into the hallway. This time the lights flickered and the carpet felt softer, almost soaked. She kept going, ignoring the feeling of the floor sinking slightly under each step. She turned the corner and there it was again, her door. She started to turn the doorknob but stopped. From the other side, there was a low, continuous sound, like slow chewing. She pulled away, panting, and decided to try the stairs. She found the fire door and pushed it open. The smell that came from inside was unbearable. Metal, rust, and something sweet. The same odor I'd smelled in the apartment, only more concentrated. He ran down the stairs as quickly as he could, his hands sliding along the cold banister. But when he reached the 12th floor and pushed open the door, he was back in the hallway on the 14th. The doors were all closed, but now there was a sound coming from behind them. Voices whispering, but not in words. It was more like modulated breathing, as if dozens of people were pressed against the doors, synchronized with the building's beat. Emily ran again, and again. She ran into her own door, but this time on the doorknob there was a note taped to it. No matter where you leave, delivery always finds you. She didn't go in. She stood there, staring at the wood, trying to figure out if what held her there was the killer, the building, or something bigger. The air grew thicker, hotter. In the distance, she heard the sound of a motorcycle starting up. She couldn't tell if she was on the street or inside the walls. And as he walked away to try to escape once more, the doorbell rang, long, constant, as if announcing that no matter how many laps he took, the next delivery was already made. The doorbell wouldn't stop. A long, even ring that vibrated through the wood and resonated inside Emily's chest like an artificial cardiac echo. She didn't move immediately. She sat on the floor watching the door, as if waiting for it to open on its own. When the sound finally stopped, there was a silence so absolute it seemed prepared. Then 3 knocks, spaced, calculated, each 5 seconds apart. Emily looked at the crack below and saw something that made her stomach churn. A shadow. but not the shadow of feet or legs. It was a jagged outline, as if something lying on the ground outside was pressed against the door, listening. The phone vibrated, a new message. "You don't need to open it. I'm already in the building." Emily felt her body stiffen. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed the sharpest knife she had, and returned to the living room. The walls were warmer, almost damp to the touch, and that's when he realized. The pounding he heard wasn't just coming from the structure anymore. Now there were two rhythms: the house's and the living, very close. The doorbell rang again, but this time only once. Then a sound that made her skin sting. The key turning. Very slowly. Emily recoiled, but the interior locks were still in place. The key stopped, and the next moment something began to slide under the door. Not a note, not an envelope, but a single photograph printed on glossy paper. She picked it up carefully, unsure why. The photo showed the interior of the apartment, the sofa, the closed curtains, and herself sleeping in the corner of the living room, her head resting against the wall. On the bottom, handwritten, "You breathe like the house." The air grew heavier. Emily felt she was being watched not just through the crack in the door, but from all sides. She looked around and noticed the curtains moving slightly, even though the windows were closed. The ceiling seemed lower, the room narrower. Then a subtle sound. The creak of wood in the bedroom. Then in the kitchen. Then at the laundry room door. Light footsteps, but coming from everywhere at once. Emily understood. There was no outside. There never was. The doorbell rang one last time. Briefly, almost a sonorous whisper. The doorknob turned, not forcefully, but with the slowness of someone in no hurry. The interior locks trembled, one by one, as if the wood itself were giving way. The pounding of the house and the pounding of humanity merged into one. Emily leaned against the wall, knife in hand, and realized the air was too hot, too close, as if someone were breathing in the same space as her. And when the last lock gave way, the apartment seemed to take a deep breath, ready to swallow. The last latch fell with a muffled click. Emily didn't scream. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The apartment pulsed, the walls closer than ever, the air so thick it felt like liquid. The door began to open, inch by inch, like lips revealing the inside of a mouth. From the growing crack came no light, no distinct shadow, only a damp human heat accompanied by a smell that mixed metal, sweat, and the same sweet perfume that had permeated the air since the first night. Emily kept the knife raised, but her fingers were no longer strong. A step entered, slow, unhurried. She saw no face, no uniform, only the certainty that what was there was inevitable. And in that instant, she realized there was no difference between the killer and the house. They both breathed together. They both wanted her. The sound of footsteps spread through the apartment, echoing inside her like her own heartbeat. The room darkened, not from lack of light, but because the space closed in, contracted, swallowed her. Emily took one last breath before disappearing into the gathering gloom, and then everything went silent. Absolute silence. Until 3 soft knocks on the door, not her door, but his. This story will only end when the delivery man knocks.